Hello, Ken Weller here with new Tech Inventors. As you can see, we've got our shelving up, some of the ANET printers assembled. Today what we're going to be doing is getting electrical power to our sub panel and onto these printers. So let's get started. Okay, this is the main panel that we're tying our sub panel into. And as you can see, we've run this cable overhead and fished it down through here. So the next step will be to put a knockout connector in here where we can feed this wire through. Then we'll install our breaker for the sub panel in this panel and connect these wires to it. And then we'll be able to get power over there. This will be the last thing that we do. We'll make sure that we've got all of our receptacles wired and the other end of this cable connected to the sub panel before we connect it here, because once we connect it here, then it can potentially be hot. Okay, this is our sub panel, and we've knocked out this knockout in the top. We're going to be installing a connector there and then feeding the other end of that service cable in and connecting it to these lugs here. Then we'll be also running our individual wires for each circuit and each receptacle that we've put in to this panel, grounding them and connecting them to the appropriate breaker and putting those in. So that'll be the step that we'll follow here before we connect the other end to the main power. Okay, this is our 12-2 with ground, 250-foot roll of it. This is the wire that we'll be using to run to each of our 20 amp receptacles. 20 amp receptacles at 110 volts require 12-2 with ground. 15 amp receptacles require 14 2 with ground. So we're running all 20 amp circuits and all 20 amp breakers. So this is the wire that we'll be using, and usually it comes as yellow, and the number 14 gauge 15 amp wires are normally white, especially if you buy them from Lowe's, but they will vary in other places. But traditionally, most times you'll find the yellow wires are the 20 amp 12 gauge. Another thing we're going to show you is this is a normal duplex receptacle. The name duplex is because there are actually two receptacles in one. This one is for 15 amps 14 gauge wire. This one is a 20 amp receptacle for 12 gauge 20 amp circuits. The difference, as you can see, is that the 20 amp on the left is a little heavier duty receptacle, and it has that little slot on the right slot. Let me get them oriented the correct way. Okay, on the left side here you can see it has a little slot over here that visually designates it to be a 20 amp receptacles, where the one there on the right is a 15 amp. Another difference is on the back. These receptacles you can actually tie the wires down under these screws, or you can plug them in to these holes in the back of the socket. Of course, the 20 amp will accept 12 gauge wire. The 15 amp won't. It will only accept 14 gauge. So we're going to be using 20 amp receptacles, 12 gauge wire throughout. Okay, what I'm going to show you now are some different breakers. This is a pretty common breaker, normal size, and you can tell whether it's 15 or 20 amp by looking on the tip of the breaker. And on this one, you can see that these are labeled as 20 amp breakers. Now these are half the size of this large one. Now we have a lot of these smaller ones because we need the smaller size to be able to get all of our circuits into this breaker panel. However, it will accept the large breaker, or it will accept 2 of the smaller breakers. And if I can get it in here right. Yeah. And this one, let's see. It's hard holding this camera and getting these in here the way they go. There we go. Okay. So you can see that we can put a single 20 amp, or we can put 2 20 amps in the same space, just depending on the size of breaker you want to use. Then they pop right back out. So we're going to be using the smaller ones to conserve space since we have a small panel here, but that's the only difference. Okay, before we start running our wiring, we need to put these little connectors in these holes that I've knocked out in the top here. And then the wire goes through these, and you tighten these 2 screws down, and that clamps the wire in. We're allowed around here to have 2 wires per connector only. So I have 6 holes up here. I'll be able to get 12 of these yellow 12 gauge wires through there. Now to put these in, you have to screw this nut onto the bottom like you see here. And that creates a little bit of problem, because when you have a finished wall like this that you're putting this into, you can't put this connector in and hold it while you put the nut on the other end. So I'm going to show you a little trick of how I'm going to do it. I've taken the nuts off of all of 6 of these. I'm going to go around behind the wall and set them in there, and then we'll see how we get the nut on. Okay, I'm in the unfinished room behind the wall now, and it's a little dark back here, but this is our panel. Now I'm going to take these things and just set them. If you can see, I'm just setting them in the holes. Okay, if you can see now, I put these into the holes, and they're just sitting in the holes. got all 6 of them in. So now we'll go around to the other side. Okay, now we're back on the other side, and what I'm going to do is take my small finger, put one of these nuts on it, and put it up into, hold that thing, then take my other hand and screw that nut on. Okay, the first one's on. Take another nut, put it on a finger, stick it up in there and hold some pressure on that connector while you take the other hand and screw the nut on. Okay, and so on. So, bring the camera in and show you a little closer. You can see that the nuts have tightened down on these connectors. And by holding my finger up in here like this, I can hold the connector steady while I put the nut on it. So that's how we're going to finish that task. Okay, I've got my wire back here in this unfinished area. There's the back of my receptacle box. I'm estimating here how much wire I'm going to need, and then I'll just cut this off. Then I'm going to have to run it up in this unfinished area. That's the back of the sloped area that you saw from the other side. And put one end of the wire in here and one through one of those connectors in the panel. Okay. Now with the help of the ladder, we got the wire into the box there and a wire going into the box over here. So we'll go around the other side and I'll show you what we've got over there. Okay, now as you can see, we've got our wire run into this receptacle. We've got it run into this receptacle. We've got it coming up into the box here. And this is the wire from this receptacle. What we're going to do, we're going to mark these wires, because once we start putting several wires in here, sometimes you can get confused and not know which receptacle they go to, and we're wanting to put them in order. Just to get I've got my marker pen here, and what I'm going to do is put a single mark on that wire. That means 1. The next wire I'll put 2 hash marks on it. I don't have a whole lot, so I'm only going to have about 8, but I'll have one with 8 little hash marks on it. And that's better than trying to put numbers on there and getting confused that way. And this will be number 1 here. It's number 1 receptacle, then number 2, 3, 4, and so on. So sometimes I can remember, but when you have them coming through the same hole here, it can get confusing. So this will help us keep it straight. Okay, as you can see, we've got our larger service cable here, back of the panel. Again, I'm going to estimate where I need to cut this so that you can see we've got several feet left down here that we don't need, so we don't want to pull any more of it than we have to. So I'm going to figure this is plenty of wire get into my panel. And since this is pretty heavy wire, we'll be cutting one strand at a time. There's two of them. Three. And the last one. I've got some larger cutters around here someplace that make this a little easier to cut, but since I don't have them with me. Okay, we've cut them. And what we have here is a 4-gauge ground and a 2-gauge 220 line, or this is your hot wires, and this is your 2-gauge neutral for those. So now we'll run them behind there and into the panel. Okay, now we're back in the other room, and you can see we finally got this heavy entrance cable, service cable in, and we've got plenty of length here to make our 3 connections. Okay, for those of you interested, now we're going to take this service cable and the little razor blade here, okay, let's see, we've got it trimmed off there. That's all we need to get in behind that lug. So we'll do that with all 3 of these. Okay, now you can see we have our 2 line wires here. That's our 220 volts and our neutral here. So we've got that connected. We'll finish running our 12 gauge wires to our circuits and then start connecting those to the ground lugs and to the breakers. Okay, as you can see, we're almost finished wiring our panel here. We have a few more ground wires to connect, and I saved this last one so I could show you how I'm stripping those out. So we're going to go ahead and finish up this panel. Okay, now I have all of these breakers connected, wired to their own circuit. I have my ground wires, my safety ground over here. I've got one circuit left, this receptacle here, and I was going to do this one just to show you what's involved in doing it. So let's get to it. Okay, first take this razor blade and you just score this wire, and then once you score it, then you can just pull this outer covering off, peel back the paper, cut it off, and then you have your 3 wires. Okay, move this stuff out of my way. we're going to run the ground wire, or rather the neutral wire, over here and up into a connector. So I bend it, find my location, cut it off, then go back and strip the end off. Then I get my screwdriver here, take that last connector there, loosen it up, put my ground wire in, and tighten it down. Just a little bit tighter here. That's good and tight. Now I take my other ground here, bend it, run it up the side. I'm going to hook it into a terminal right there, so bend it out, cut it off. Get it up under that connector. Tighten it down. Good. Tight connection. Wire back into that corner out of my way. Okay, that leaves one wire left, this black wire, and it goes to the breaker. Cut it right here, strip out the end of it. That in the breaker. Position this wire over here like so. Okay, it takes care of that. Now the other end, down here, the receptacle, about the same thing. Go in here and score with the razor blade that wire, and then you should be able to just pull it right out like that. Okay, peel the paper back on this. Snap it out of there. It's a little bit longer than what we need. I'm going to cut it off right about here. And we strip out our two ends of the wire. And we take our receptacle, and this little green screw here is your ground. This side with the screw on it is your neutral, and these are usually silver and more of a brass over here on the line side. So we'll hook up the neutral side first. We'll put the wire in this top little hole, and we'll tighten this screw down. Get it good and tight. Okay. Then we'll put the line, or the hot side, And the other side of this receptacle, we put it in this hole behind the screw here. Loosen it up a little more. Okay. Now we'll tighten this thing down. Okay, make sure they're both good and tight. Okay. Now we're going to take this ground wire and we're going to put a little bend in the end of it. And hook it under this little green screw. Okay, this is good and tight. Let's go up and take a little closer look. First of all, we'll see where we ran our wire to this breaker. Hooked our ground up here with the other grounds. Our neutral came over here to the other side and hooked in with the other neutrals. So that was the breaker side. Then on this receptacle, we hooked up our line on the hot side, neutral on the neutral side, and our ground up here on this green screw. Okay, now we're going to put this receptacle in. We just bend these wires down and then back up, so they kind of go in there like an accordion. Then you take this top screw and a screwdriver here. Get it started in that top hole. Then take our bottom screw, line it up with the bottom hole in our box. Feels like it's in there. Okay, we've got it in. Now we'll take a cover plate here. Okay. As you can see, this cover plate has a little screw in the center. Put it over that. Tighten that screw down. Okay, so we did that with all of the receptacles on down the line here. So you can see that we've got them all of our receptacles wired in, our panels ready. It's about ready to have the cover put on it. So we'll go to the next step.